Flames of War 2. Momanga sat on a lavish chair, gazing into a mirror about a meter wide. But it wasn't his own reflection staring back at him. It was a field of grass. The mirror was displaying an entirely different scene, almost as if it were a television. He reached out his hand and moved it to the right. The view in the mirror slid sideways, just like a camera panning. He had stuffed his staff into his item box earlier to get it out of the way. The mirror of remote viewing. In Yggdrasil, this item was a simple magical tool used to peek into crowded places, like castles or towns, to check for the best times to go shopping. Now, however, it had transformed into an item capable of easily displaying the outside world. The scene flowed by, a bird's-eye view of a prairie that looked like something out of a movie. The landscape it showed was already in the morning. The dew-covered blades of grass sparkled beautifully as they reflected the morning sun. Momanga moved his hand in circles through the air, experimenting with the view. It had been an hour since he'd noticed the magic item's properties had changed. Despite his trial and error, he had yet to find a single human. Frankly, he was getting bored. In this new body, he didn't feel the slightest need for sleep. He had been continuing this Where's Waldo-like task in silence, but his motivation was fading as the mirror showed him nothing but the same unchanging grassland. I have to figure out how to get a higher vantage point. He kept trying, wishing there was an instruction manual. Oh! Momanga let out a cry of joy, much like a programmer 8 hours into overtime who finally gets something to work after fiddling with it randomly. He repeated the motion several times and at last figured out how to adjust the camera's altitude. I'm exhausted. In his delight, he rolled his head around, even though his shoulders weren't actually stiff. All right then. Like a child with a new toy, Momanga zoomed the view out dramatically, trying to capture a much wider area. First, he tried to display his own stronghold, the Great Tomb of Nazarick. In Yggdrasil, it had been situated in the middle of a poison swamp, but now, just as Sebas had said, it was surrounded by plains. The surface level of the Great Tomb of Nazarick spanned a 300-meter square. It was protected by thick walls 6 meters high, with 2 entrances, a main gate and a rear gate. The undergrowth was neatly trimmed, giving it a clean image, but at the same time, the massive trees within the cemetery let their branches hang low, creating a gloomy atmosphere. The tombstones were not arranged in neat rows. Their haphazard placement created a jarring contrast with the well-kept grounds. On the other hand, many were finely sculpted, with angels and goddesses, and some sections could be appreciated as works of art. Within the cemetery stood 4 moderately sized mausoleums at the north, south, east, and west points, with a colossal one in the center. The entrance to the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the central mausoleum, was encircled by 8 statues of warriors in armor, each about 10 meters tall. It was a familiar sight. Still, seeing it from a bird's-eye view felt fresh and new. Normally, the old guarders, skeletal soldiers who patrolled the graveyard in formation, should have been there, but they were nowhere to be seen, perhaps having been ordered to stand down. Satisfied with the view, Momanga began his search for people in earnest. After a short while, the image of a village appeared in the mirror. It seemed to be about 2 kilometers southwest of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. There was a forest nearby and wheat fields spread out around the village. It was the very picture of a pastoral scene. As Momanga started to zoom in on the village, he felt a sense of unease. A festival? It was early in the morning, yet people were running in and out of their houses, bustling about. It was chaotic. He magnified the overhead view, and his brow furrowed. Men dressed as knights were swinging their swords at the shabbily clothed villagers. It was a one-sided slaughter. With every swing of the knight's swords, another villager fell. The villagers had no way to fight back. All they could do was flee in desperation. The knights chased them down, cutting them down one by one. In the wheat fields, the horses that the knights had presumably ridden were grazing on the crops. This was a massacre. A wave of nausea washed over Momanga. He spat, about to change the scene. This village was worthless to him now. Going there would mean seeing nothing but corpses. There was no point in watching any longer. Momonga didn't have a sick hobby like spectating death. Momonga was no hero of justice. He was level 100, but as he had told Demiurge, the average person in this world might be level 10,000. He couldn't just jump into such a dangerous situation. If Sebes or Demiurge were in the room with him, he might have sent them. But right now, he was alone. Besides, although the knights were slaughtering the villagers, there might be a reason for it. Disease, a crime, making an example of them. He could think of many possibilities. If he were to suddenly intervene and drive off the knights, he might make an enemy of the nation they served. He still had far too little information. If he knew more, maybe it would have been worth saving them. But as things stood, this village wasn't worth the risk. The value of a life changes depending on the time and place. In modern Japan, a life is held in high regard. But go to parts of Africa and the value of a life plummets. To say all lives are equal is something only someone who doesn't know the world would say. If you had to choose between saving someone you cared about and a total stranger, which would you pick? In this world, life is taken this easily. That's something I should remember.
Yes, Momonga was no hero of justice. He thought he was remaining calm, but he must have been shaken. His hand slipped, and a different part of the village came into view. Two knights were pulling a struggling villager away from another. Forced apart and held by both arms, the villager stood exposed. Before Momonga's eyes, a sword plunged into the villager. Once, twice, 3 times, the knight stabbed repeatedly, as if venting his rage. Finally, the knight kicked the villager, who collapsed to the ground, spraying blood. Then, surely by coincidence, in Yggdrasil, no one could ever notice you were watching them through the mirror. The villager's eyes met Momonga's, or perhaps it just felt that way. The villager, blood foaming at the corners of his mouth, moved his lips desperately. His vision was already blurred. He couldn't see anything clearly. Yet he clung to life, trying to form words. "Please, save my daughters." To repeat, Momonga was no hero of justice. He would never help a stranger if there was absolutely nothing in it for him. He wouldn't say that profit was everything, but it accounted for more than half of his decisions. But that meant, if there was a benefit, he would help people. In any case, I need to test my combat abilities sooner or later. Who was he even talking to? Muttering to himself, Momonga zoomed the view out to see the entire village. His gaze sharpened, searching for any living villagers. As the view settled on one spot, he saw a young girl punch a knight, sending him flying. She then tried to flee, pulling a smaller girl, likely her sister, along with her. He immediately opened his item box and took out the staff of Ain's Ualgaun. In that instant, the girl was cut across the back. Momonga's face twisted in disgust. The spell slipped from his lips in a flash. Greater teleportation. His vision shifted, and he appeared exactly where he had been observing from above just moments before. Before him stood 2 young girls. The older one, presumably the sister, had chestnut brown hair in a braid that reached her chest. Her sun-tanned, healthy skin was pale with fear. Her dark eyes welled with tears, and her face, which would have been cute otherwise, was contorted in terror. The younger sister buried her face in the older one's waist, her entire body trembling. She must have been terrified. No, of course she was. It'd be strange if she wasn't. Momonga looked past the 2 girls at the knight behind them. The knight was clearly shocked by Momonga's sudden appearance. His panic was palpable. Momonga had lived a life far removed from violence, save for the battles in Yggdrasil. He had almost no experience with real life and death, yet he felt remarkably calm now. He spread his empty hand and reached out. Grasp Heart. It was a 9th-tier spell, a high-ranking spell on the 1 to 10 scale. It was an instant death spell that crushed the target's heart. If the target resisted, it would inflict damage and temporarily stun them. It was one of Momonga's favorite attack spells, especially since it left a clean corpse, preserving the data. The knight collapsed. He must have failed his resistance check. An instant kill. Momonga looked down coldly at the knight lying on the ground. Surprisingly, I don't feel anything, even after killing someone. Was it because the corpse was clean, or because he was angry about what the knights were doing? No, it feels like something else. But Momonga couldn't quite put his finger on it. It was a faint frustration, like having a word on the tip of your tongue, but not being able to say it. Momonga started walking. He passed the two girls, who were trembling at the knight's death. As he did, a faint, bewildered sound escaped the older sister. Momonga didn't know what it meant, nor did he feel the need to understand. For now, securing the area was the priority. He glanced at the older sister's torn, shabby clothes and the blood seeping through the fabric on her back. He then moved to place himself in front of the two girls, shielding them. He glared sharply at a new knight emerging from the side of a nearby house. The knight must have noticed him. He took a fearful step back. You can chase down women and children, but you can't handle a different kind of opponent. Muttering under himself, Momonga considered which spell to cast next. The last one was a high-tier spell. It wouldn't allow him to gauge how strong these knights truly were. How effective were his spells against them? This was a good chance to test the strength of this world, and, by extension, my own. Sorry to drag you into this, but since you're here, you're going to be my test subjects. Magic Arrow. 10 orbs of light appeared, rushing toward the knight with trails of light behind them. The first hit sent him staggering back. The second lifted him slightly into the air. The remaining orbs swarmed the suspended knight. It looked like a combo from a fighting game, juggling an opponent in mid-air. The knight fell to the ground like a broken doll. He didn't move a muscle. Momonga, who had been preparing a follow-up attack, was stunned. Magic Arrow was a first tier, the lowest tier, non-elemental attack spell. While the number of orbs increased with the user's level, making it a decent spell, it was still difficult to kill a monster above level 10 with a single cast. So, are these knights below level 10 in Yggdrasil terms? Magic Arrow had nothing special. It looked like a test. That was the only explanation. The tension drained from him. They were too weak. Of course, it was possible that just those two were weak. Still, it was hard to regain his sense of urgency. He was prepared to retreat with a teleportation spell the moment he sensed danger. It was also entirely possible that while they had low defense and health, their attack power was extremely high, or that Momonga's own health was low enough to be killed in one hit. In Yggdrasil, getting your throat slit was just a critical hit with massively increased damage. In the real world, it would be instant death.
As the tension faded, Momonga replaced it with caution. Only an idiot dies from carelessness. First, he needed to test his abilities further. Momonga unleashed one of his special skills. Create high-tier undead, Death Knight. One of Momonga's skills allowed him to create undead. It was an ability that produced relatively weak undead, but they were useful as shields, so he often used it when adventuring solo. The Death Knight was the undead monster he used most often as a meat shield. It was around level 35, but its defensive capabilities were on par with a level 40 monster. Its offensive power, however, was low, equivalent to a level 25 monster. Against the high-difficulty monsters Momonga usually fought, it would be killed in one hit, but for a magic caster, even a single hit's worth of protection was invaluable. That was the kind of monster he was about to create, from Momonga's perspective. In Yggdrasil, upon summoning, it would instantly materialize out of thin air next to him. But it seemed to be different in this world. A black mist seeped out of mid-air and draped itself over the body of the knight whose heart had been crushed. The mist swelled and melted into the knight. Then, with an inhumanly jerky movement, the knight staggered to his feet. A gurgling sound was heard, and a black fluid began to pour from the gaps in the knight's helmet, likely spewing from his mouth. The viscous darkness flowed endlessly, enveloping his entire body. It was like watching a human being devoured by a slime.
The darkness completely engulfed the knight, its shape distorting and changing. After a few blinks of an eye, the darkness flowed away like a waterfall, and standing in its place was a being that could only be called a Knight of Death. It stood 2.3 meters tall. Its body was just as massively built as it was, more beast than man. In its left hand, it held a massive tower shield, large enough to cover 3/4 of its body. In its right, a flamberge. The nearly 1.3-meter-long blade, which would normally require 2 hands, was held easily in one by this giant. A sinister reddish-black aura clung to the undulating blade, pulsing like a heartbeat. The giant's body was clad in black full-plate armor, with crimson patterns running across it like veins. Unlike the functional armor of the previous knight, this was the very embodiment of violence, with spikes jutting out from various points. The helmet was adorned with demonic horns, and the face was open. What lay within was a rotting human face. In the hollow eye sockets, a hateful red light burned brightly, filled with malice for the living and an eagerness for slaughter. With its tattered black cape fluttering behind it, the Death Knight awaited its orders. Its posture was imposing, befitting an undead knight. To put it in one word, the difference was freedom. Normally, a Death Knight was meant to wait by the summoner, Momonga, and intercept any monsters that attacked. It wasn't supposed to accept orders and act on its own like this. It was an unavoidable limitation of its AI programming. I hope this difference doesn't cause problems. When what you think you know turns out to be wrong, you make big mistakes. Errors born from preconceived notions. It was a mistake everyone has probably made at least once, but in Momonga's current situation, it could be fatal. Momonga narrowed his eyes and released the magic stored in the bracelet on his right arm. The spell was Call Sense Enemy. The result? No hostile presence in the vicinity. Now, then, Momonga turned around. The 2 girls he had seen earlier shrank back under his blunt gaze, trying to make themselves smaller. Their bodies were trembling uncontrollably. Well, he had just killed a knight right in front of them. It was understandable that they'd be terrified. Momonga accepted this and reached a hand toward the older sister. He intended to heal her wound. To Momonga, accustomed to the game of Yggdrasil, his OverLord appearance wasn't particularly shocking. Even if he stood before other players, none would be surprised. That was because everyone knew it was a game, and they had the information that such appearances and monsters existed. But what if someone didn't know? What if this was the real world? What if a monster that could easily kill people reached out its hand to you? The reaction was singular. A wet patch spread across the older sister's crotch, and then the younger sister's as well. The smell of ammonia filled the air. A wave of exhaustion he shouldn't have been able to feel washed over him. Even Momonga didn't know what to do. You seem to be injured.
But as a working adult, Momonga's ability to ignore things was well honed. Pretending not to have noticed, he opened his item box and took out a haversack. The Infinity Haversack, despite its name, it could hold up to 500 kilograms. The reason he had such an item when he had an item box that could hold things infinitely was that items in the haversack could be registered to shortcuts. Items in the item box, on the other hand, could not. It was a basic tactic known even to beginners in Yggdrasil to put items you wanted to use instantly into this bag. It was one of Momonga's Infinity Haversacks. He should have a stock of potions in there. He reached in and, without fumbling, pulled out a single red potion. A minor healing potion. In Yggdrasil, it was a potion that restored 50 HP, something you relied on heavily in the early stages. However, for Momonga, it was a useless item. Potions like this, which healed with positive energy, were like poison to an undead like him, causing damage instead. The reason he had such a poison was that it was a leftover from when he used to adventure with his party members. Drink it. He thrust the red potion at her unceremoniously.
The older sister's face contorted in fear. I'll drink it, so please don't hurt my sister. Big sister! The younger sister cried, trying to stop her. The older sister, apologizing to her sibling, reached for the potion. Do they think it's poison or human blood or something? What is this? While people were still dying and being killed all around them, a sense of irritation welled in Momonga. To him, who understood most of what was happening, this felt like some kind of comedy. Just drink it already. While I'm wasting time here, the other villagers are being killed. At those words, the older sister's eyes widened and she hurriedly downed the potion in one gulp. Then, her expression turned to one of astonishment. She touched her right hand, then her back. She seemed surprised that the pain was gone. No way! As if in disbelief, she touched and tapped her right arm several times. So, drinking a healing potion works. Momonga filed that information away. The next question arose, what would happen if you poured it on a wound? He would have to test that too. The pain is gone, right? Yes. The older sister nodded, her face a perfect picture of stunned disbelief. So, a minor healing potion is enough for a wound like that. Satisfied, Momonga moved on to his next question. This one was unavoidable. The answer would change all of his future actions. Do you two know what magic is? Huh? I'm asking if you've ever seen anyone use magic. No, I never have. Momonga suppressed the urge to click his tongue. It would be one thing if magic was kept secret, but if he and his subjects were the only magic users in this world, it would undoubtedly lead to all sorts of trouble. In that case, he would have to limit his use of magic as much as possible. It wasn't a pleasant thought to have his advantages restricted. Seeing the older sister mumbling, looking like she wanted to say something, Momonga gestured with his chin for her to continue. But, what is it? I've heard there are people with powers like that in the cities. I see. That makes things easier. I am a magic caster. With a hint of relief, Momonga began to chant. Anti-life cocoon, wall of protection from arrows. Translucent spider silk-like threads formed a 2-meter radius dome around the sisters. The next spell he cast produced no visible effect, but the flow of the air changed slightly. Ideally, he would add an anti-magic spell to this for perfect protection, but since he didn't know what kind of magic existed in this world, he refrained. If a magic caster did show up, they just have to consider themselves unlucky. This is a protective spell that repels living things and another that blocks arrows. As long as they don't use poison gas or magic, you'll be safe in there. Also, it's easy to get out. But know that if you do anything foolish, I will not help you a second time. He briefly explained the effects of the magic to the astonished sisters, and then started to walk away, recalling the layout of the village from his memory. What is it? He was about to leave when the older sister called out to him. Momonga swallowed the urge to yell at her. The sisters were victims too. They might have lost their family, their friends. It was too cruel to take out his own frustration on such a child. Your name, swallowing hard, the girl asked, "What is your name?" He was about to give his name, but closed his mouth. What should he call himself? Momonga was the name of the former guildmaster of Ainswalgon. But who was he now? The master of the great tomb of Nazareth? What was his name? Momonga thought, my friends, what would you all think of one person monopolizing that proud name? Would you be happy or would you frown upon it? If so, come here and tell me. Tell me that that name doesn't belong to you alone. And when you do, I will gladly go back to being Momonga. Until then, I will maintain my existence as the pinnacle of this name. If it has become a hollow relic, I will fill it and make it a legend once more. In this world, I will make our guild's name a legend. You may call me Ainswalgon.